Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Ayers, and today we're going to be talking about feature flags. Um, I think there is a little bit to art with ifs, considering feature flags might be just considered an if to some, but I really also want to talk about deployment and how we use feature flags. I do want to first give a big shout out and thanks to Music City Tech and all the sponsors that are helping them out. This is how we get to put on events and content. So my name is Chris Ayers. I'm the practice lead for Intelligent Cloud at the Cognizant Microsoft Business Group. And what that means is I run a practice that does Azure infrastructure, including things like data center migrations and landing zones. I do a lot of DevOps work, GitHub work, so CI/CD pipelines, database DevOps, talking about deployment and infrastructure as code. And I do app modernization, helping customers take their applications from on-prem into the cloud, specifically with some focus on containerization as well. So I am going to be using some code for my GitHub, but we'll talk about that later. And feel free to reach out and follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. So feature flags, what are they? Why are we going to use them? I sometimes say release, I sometimes say deploy. Well, what's the difference? And as we start looking at flags, how do we operationalize these? How do we use these at scale? And I've got code samples that we're going to dive into. We're going to see using feature flags in real time and what some of those options look like. So what are they? Well, let's say we've got some code. We've got an application. This is a little bit of fake C#, but we've got something that does some work and we want to add some new functionality. We want to change it in some way. Well, what some people have done in the past is maybe they just put a variable in their function that says, hey, I want to do the new cool unicorn thing. And we set it to false so that, we never actually do that new thing. We just pretty much always call the old implementation or just always using that old implementation. And just locally, someone might uncomment it to turn it on. And it's just an if. Should I use the old thing? Should I use the new thing? That gets real clunky. And so what we started doing and what is pretty common nowadays is having some sort of library or framework to help control is stuff on or off. Now this might be a simple configuration file. It could be whatever, but the intent is, if it's turned on, maybe we do the new thing, and if it's turned off, we do the current thing or the old thing. Well, why might we use all these things? And there's a couple of great reasons. Some is code separation. We don't necessarily want to have old code and new code mixed into the same files. As soon as you start using feature flags, you really are incurring some sort of technical debt because now you have extra logic and old things and new things. It could be that you have multiple implementations of stuff and they're in different files, they're separated, they're logic and consistent amongst themselves, and they're more isolated. Maybe you want to use feature flags to minimize disruption to customers. You're working on a feature, it's not done yet, so you've got it turned off until you're ready. So you can keep working, but you're not going to disrupt people. Maybe you want to do progressive rollouts. We're going to talk about some of this stuff a little bit more, but instead of deploying this thing to every single one of your customers at the exact same time, maybe you do it to a small percentage, make sure it works okay, and then a little bit bigger percentage, and you start progressively rolling out. That's going to help you control that blast radius of change. A/B testing, experiment in production with your users. It's great. It's wonderful. And I think a lot of people should do this where you can have hypotheses around how your customers might interact or react to capabilities or features on your website or application. And you can experiment with that. Does the red button, does the blue button get more traction? Does this new menu make it easier to navigate? These are ways you can do it. Maybe you have some sort of functionality in your application that is intensive. So maybe you have a recommendation engine built into your marketing website. And when you get under a lot of load, that extra marketing processing might slow down your response times. It might actually hurt the system. So maybe you could have some sort of automation to automatically turn that off when you get to a certain set of load. I also view there's some like short, medium, and long-term type uses of feature flags. In the short term, these really should be ideally used, try a new feature, try an experiment, and then take them out when you're done. Now, because feature flags can have a very small scope, they could be anywhere. So you might have a feature flag in some library or in some method far down in your application, or it could just be on a UI. It could be anywhere. But not all flags are the exact same. I get this question a lot when I talk with people about feature flags, and there is a line there between a feature flag and business logic. I've seen people try to use feature flags for things that maybe are business logic, and try to use business logic for things that maybe are feature flags. And so like licensing, I've seen cases where maybe you have a demo license, and with a feature flag enabled for a user, an account, or something, they have access to additional features. They get the standard license, they get a premium license. Maybe it's an integration. So maybe on an e-commerce site, you have a payment processors, and you do Visa, and maybe you want to do PayPal, or maybe you want to take Bitcoin, whatever that might be. Those could be, as you're working on a new payment processor, it's turned off and you turn it on. Now, this might be something like an operational flag. You have this integration with this organization, and it's not a short-term feature flag, but it's something to consider. Advanced features. I know on many applications, sometimes at the top right, you can say, I want to enable a preview feature for those users that are prosumers or advanced users. They maybe want some additional customization that you don't see for everyone else, and they could turn on and off those features. And I already mentioned like the marketing recommendation engine, that might be a case of load management. When you get surges in traffic, maybe you can use feature flags to automatically turn off parts of the system. And that kind of brings me to this topic of deployment and release. For many people, they treat them as the same. And I have a long history of deployment and DevOps, and I definitely do not feel these things are the same. I think deployments are something that are very low risk. These are very repeatable. This is putting bits on a server. In DevOps, as I start having pipelines and I'm having automation through CI/CD to build code, it passes our tests, it passes load testing, acceptance quality. We can put it out on servers. This can be done with zero downtime deployments. It's very routine. All of our tests have passed. We're putting code out in places. I view this as just a normal process where we're making code and deploying it day in and day out. I don't need to wait if the feature is done and all the quality is there till the end of the sprint or the end of the month, or at a quarter. Now, releases, those usually have a bigger impact. They're higher risk. And I think these are business decisions. Businesses don't typically go and announce, hey, we did a bug fix 1, 2, 3, but they'll advertise. Their business decision is, hey, version 2.0 of our application is out. This new incredible feature is going to be available. That can drive customer satisfaction, impact, but these are really controlled through the business decisions. And this does allow for some experimentation, as you roll out and get towards these bigger features. But by leveraging the idea of I'm putting bits on a server all the time and I'm selectively turning on and off releases, this allows us to control and limit the blast radius of change. So maybe we turn on a feature just for internal users. We have a very small scope of people that are using new features, and we can start gathering data. Is it buggy? Does it generate additional load? Did we do it wrong? And it's not actually helping people in the right way. Maybe we could do canary testing. And we have a small number of of users that are alpha testers or beta testers. As we start doing progressive rollouts, we start doing it to 10% of our users, 30%, 50%, and then we go to full deployment. These are capabilities that feature flags allow you to do, where you can turn it on, and if it's not working right, you can turn it back off without changing the code or redeploying bits, because it's not a code deployment way of turning on and off the feature. It's through the feature flags. And that drives us to that operationalizing them. How do we use these in an enterprise or an organization at scale? I've already mentioned feature flags are technical debt as soon as you add them. It can be very hard to support the system. What is the state of feature flags in QA? What is the state of feature flags in prod? Did you test the different scenarios? Did someone turn on something in production that we didn't know about? What was the state of the flags for that user when they ran into the problem? Was it the new feature or the old feature? We need to make model changes or database changes. Those all can be aspects of feature flags, but this is where that control aspect, this is where we operationalize them. How are we managing what's turned on and what's turned off? Is it in the code, like that variable? Is it in a configuration file checked in next to our software? Are we able to do it? Is there a file we put on a server or in a container that tells you which feature you're getting? Is it stored in a database, or so that we can identify it per user or per some query string? Or is it dynamic, where it queries and figures out if a user has a feature or doesn't have a feature? This is where these feature flag management services come into play, where we can have either real-time querying at runtime of a flag value, or we can do caching, or we can do it at startup so that it just understands the value of the flags earlier on. And this is where we can actually target things as we sometimes add those real-time capabilities. Maybe, I've worked at some retailers, for instance, and they had marketing campaigns that trigger and new functionality that turns on around like Mother's Day or Thanksgiving. And so they would always be afraid of deployments anywhere near that time. And so they would do all this testing and all these deployments weeks in advance. But what if you didn't have to worry about that sort of, deploy to turn it on and deploy again at the end of the holiday period to turn it off? What if you would just been deploying it and that feature is there, and we can turn on the feature through the flag during that weekend and turn it off via that flag at the end of the weekend? We don't need to deploy anything. We could just turn on and off this flag, and we've added the functionality and removed it. Maybe there's some verbiage or some functionality that's very specific to a region. Maybe we don't offer certain things in APAC, but we do in the United States and North America. Those are some options we have. Maybe we act a certain way towards a user that has a standard license, but we give them different functionality when they're a premium license member. These are some details that you can use to target groups. As we do these rollouts, we talked about progressive rollouts. Start at 10% of people with it on and 90% of people with it off, and start transitioning over time. And then that kill switch idea, the idea of using it to help with load, these can trigger system metrics can trigger turning on and off a flag. So this gives us some capabilities to use as part of our applications in a bigger environment. Now, some best practices I've seen before we dive into the code: have a naming convention for your feature flags. Be it short-term, long-term, whatever, have a naming convention. We have modern day compilers and modern day languages. You don't need to use 2-letter abbreviations for things. Be descriptive, have long, meaningful names, but have a consistent naming convention that is used everywhere. Have a central place for your flags, one place to look for them. There should not be, you shouldn't have to go hunt all throughout the code to find if there's been a new feature flag added. Like, there should be a central place, and people should know what it means. These should be shared and discussed. The business team should know about it. The development team should know about it. The operations team should know about it. DevOps, however your team is structured, everyone should be aware of the impact of some of these flags. And finally, never repurpose feature flags. I don't remember the exact company's name. Maybe it might have been Knight or something, but there was a company that traded on the stock market and bought and sold shares. And, they had some applications that were pretty much directly connected to the stock exchange or very quickly, accessible to it. And they had a feature flag that existed on the system and they reused it for some purpose. And it triggered a very strange scenario, and the software started buying and selling things in a way it wasn't originally designed to do. And the company actually went bankrupt because they owed like $100 million because of some erroneous trades that were made based on reusing a feature flag. I'll see if I can pull that up at the end because it's a really good read on the dangers of like reusing feature flags. Another, I think, point that comes up that really needs to be addressed is models, be it in a database, be it in a schema, be it in a JSON file. As we start changing functionality, a lot of times we need more data, new fields, new views, some sort of parameters. Always be additive. If you take 3 parameters, or you have a model with like a first name and a last name and a phone number, and you're like, it was created as a number instead of a string for whatever reason, don't go in and change the type of the model. Add a new field, because that separates your database and your schema model deployments from your application deployments. As you like start changing your database schema and you're adding new columns, or you're trying to change views, add a new view. That allows the old software and the new software to live side by side without causing issues. And you can use feature flags to turn on the new functionality, looking at the new models, and you can turn it off and look at the old models. It also allows you the chance to deprecate older things. So instead of removing a field, deprecate it and leave it there for a while. And then over time, you can remove it just like the rest of your feature flags and the technical debt you might have incurred from that. So let's get into some code and actually talk about 2 technologies that I've been looking at that are interesting. We're going to do Azure App Config, and then we're going to do Launch Darkly. So I've got a repo. I will share this into the chat for everybody. This has some code, some feature flags. So I've got 3 different examples here, and I'm going to start with the first one, the Azure App Config Quick Start. So the Azure App Config Quick Start. By default, Azure App Config is a great service. They have an Azure Key Vault, which is used for secret management. Azure App Config is usually used for configuration management, but they do have some functionality for feature flags. And let me actually go up there to the resource. So this is Azure App Config. I've got a sample one, and you can see I can get some information about when requests happen. I can see all the configuration settings I have in here if I need it down here. But I've got a feature flag called beta. And I can apply labels for different environments. I can give it a description. And then I can also do those things we talked about with targeting certain types of users or groups or certain time windows, or I can even have a custom filter where I can have some logic. And if there's a business case I need to turn on something for someone or off, I can do that. But this is a feature flag. And Azure App Config, it's designed more for configuration, but it has this feature capability, and I can turn it on and I can turn it off very easily. Cool. So I have a flag, you turn it on, you turn it off. How do I access that in code? Well, the Azure App Config team wrote some modules specifically for .NET called feature management. And this gives you some capabilities to, and I've got, so Microsoft Feature Management ASP Core. So it's a feature management library built into ASP. And I also have the app config module I'm using to talk to app config. So Azure App Config integrates with .NET and ASP just like the normal configuration engine does. Let me go ahead and minimize that. So in the program file, when you're first starting up, I'm getting a connection string for app config, and the configuration is connecting out to Azure App Config and using the feature flag capabilities. So I'm just from Azure App Config, where I just was. I got an access key, and you can get a connection string, put it in your CI/CD pipelines. You can transform it. You can put it in your connection strings on the website, and you can pull this configuration in and initialize feature flags with it. So that's one small change we did in our program file. In our startup, under services, we're adding feature management. So that is the other piece that we're doing. And really, that's about it for enabling it. Now, you can see I've got the Microsoft Feature Management library that got added in. But now that it's kind of wired up, it's pulled into the configuration, we've enabled this feature management service, how do I interact with it? Well, there's actually a couple of great ways this integrates into .NET. Let me look at my home controller here. You can see I'm just returning some views, just normal views. But let's say I have a beta controller that I only want people to be able to access if this feature flag is turned on. I've got Feature Manager injected into my controller. This comes through the dependency injection service. And I'm just saving a copy of it in the constructor, this Feature Manager snapshot, which is what is the state of the feature flag. And this pretty much gets initialized at program start. So whatever the flag is when I start the application, if it's on, the feature flag will be on. If it's off, it'll be off. If I turn it on or off after I've started the application, this will not pick up that change. I'm going to show you how to do that, but by default, out of the box, doing a little quick start, on startup, it reads the state of the feature flags, and that's what it is until it's killed off or restarted. But that feature management library adds FeatureGate as a capability. So you can place this attribute on MVC actions, and I pretty much just have an enum that says beta, but this FeatureGate controls whether index will or will not work. All right, great. I have a controller, it's accessing an endpoint, but what about the markup? Like, what about if I want to see this in the navigation? Well, there's some other capabilities for feature management as well. If I come down here into my shared layout, so this is a Razor file, CSHTML. This tag right here, feature, is supported by that feature management library. So right inside my markup, I can just say, hey, this is part of feature beta. I want to expose that controller. So now I should see the beta navigation element in my markup if it's on, and it should not be there if it's off. I've got these running out in, I've got this running out in Azure. So I have this little quick start here. So let me go to it, and we'll see what happens turning it on and off. Same thing happens locally, but so I've got my site up. I'm running on a lean plan, so I might just take it a quick sec to spin up. And if not, I'll invoke it locally. Come on. All right, well, we'll just do it locally then. All right, so we're running this code. Oh, I removed a connection string earlier locally just while I was debugging. So let me put that back in. And we'll rerun. There we go. Oh, and it finally came up. The one in Azure finally came up. So I've got that beta navigation here. Here's my beta website. I can see that this is running, and that is actually the same as my local one. So I've got the beta website and I got the beta link. Let's go into our feature flag library and let's turn off that flag and see what happens. And then we'll show how we can make this more dynamic. So it's on right now. I'm gonna turn it off. It's now off. Okay, so let's go back to our website and hit refresh, and it's still there. And let me look at my local one and hit refresh, and it's still there. So like I said, it takes a snapshot when it starts up. So I'm gonna quit the local application and rerun the local one again. Rebuilding, and it's hosting again. So if I come back here and refresh the local one, beta is now gone. Well, I remember I was able to do /beta before. So let's see what happens if I, just go around the endpoint and say /beta, not found. So it's not responding, it's not working. That feature is turned off. In Azure, I've refreshed this, it's still not picking it up. What I actually have to do is I have to restart for the configuration I have in Azure, and takes it a sec to actually process the restart. But once I see it spinning for a minute, it'll have finished the restart, and the feature will be off, and it won't have that cached value anymore. All right, so what can we do about this caching problem, about keeping our application config? How can we make it be more dynamic? Well, that's where we can tell it to go refresh the configuration and cache it for a certain amount of time. Instead of only looking at it at startup, we can say, hey, let's go and have it look every X amount of seconds and look at the cache. So in that repo I shared earlier, there is another project. So that was the quick start one. This is the dynamic one. If we go and look at the controllers, it's laid out the exact same way. Haven't made any changes to the controllers. If we go look at the HTML and Razor, we're still using that feature tag. So how we interact with the feature flag has not changed there. Let's look in our startup. So here in our startup, I've added app config, but I've also got feature management still. The change that really affects this dynamicism is in our program. And we had that connect before, but now we've got this configure a refresh. And we're saying, I want to have some refresh options on beta, and I want to cache for 5 seconds. So after it's not used for 5 seconds, the default is 30. I'm setting it to 5. It should it should re-get the value, and yeah, it should re-get the value and turn on and off things quickly. So let's go back, and I'm going to close this quick start, and I'm going to bring up the dynamic one. So let's look at our dynamic one, and we should be able to once this comes up, what's the state of our flag? So right now our flag is off. I'm just waiting on that site to come up. And just like before, what I can do is I can quit what we're doing here, run it locally at the same time. So our site, our flag is off, and our site does not show this. And here, if I refresh this, this is our dynamic one, it's off. So I'm gonna turn this on. And I did say cache for like 5 seconds. So let's give it a second and yeah, refresh. There's beta. So we haven't restarted the website. It came up. This one just needed a few seconds. There's beta. And so we didn't have to redeploy our app. We didn't have to restart our app. I was able to toggle this, and it, I have control over the configuration about how long I want to wait. There's some fine tuning. This is not as fast as Launch Darkly. Launch Darkly pretty much touts how quickly they can invalidate and push out new configurations, like in milliseconds, hundreds of milliseconds. So that is one of their selling points. And so let's look at Launch Darkly now. Any questions so far on where we are? All right. So Launch Darkly. This is a great application, a great library and platform. They trying to get out to their main site. They have a lot of integrations kind of across the board with different libraries. Azure App Config, I think, has some limitations on the language and library support. But let's say, we're looking at Launch Darkly. I've got some projects. Right now it's my default project, and I can have multiple environments. For environments, I've got this feature flag. I can have selected targeting. So remember, we talked about maybe we want to target things in certain ways, and this lets you do prerequisite flags. This lets you target certain users, and you can see it's pretty easy to get in here and say which ways I want to do things, maybe, which attributes I want to look at. Like, you have a lot of easy functionality that you can use to configure the feature flag library. Just like with Azure App Config, you can see evaluations and hits against this, but there are some additional reporting around the variations. They give you some capabilities for experimentation. Experimentation does not always need to be UI. It's not always about buttons. Sometimes it's we're going to swap out our sorting algorithm or our recommendation algorithm to lower metrics, lower performance on the system. Maybe you need to have some additional variations. You can look at the history of turning things on or off. I'm going to mention that they also have some hook-ins so that if you're using like GitHub to compile your code, this can search for code references inside of your code. It can actually tell you, hey, this flag is being used in your code base on these lines. It's a really cool feature that I think helps with that technical debt management. And then there's different ways of interacting with it. They have SDKs for both mobile and client side. But let's go back to using the flag. So right now you can see it's off. I've got, oddly enough, inside that code base, I know it's a shocker, there's a Launch Darkly application. So let's look through this together. So let me look at my program files. This is just normal. There's no additional changes that were done on the program file. Now let's look at startup. And I will be clear, there was a recent update to the SDK. I'm on version 5, and I think 6 is the latest. So this might tweak a little bit, but I've added the capability to inject configuration. By default, their sample app has you like creating feature flag services right in a controller. And yeah, let's take a look at that. So like the home controller here. This is where we've injected our configuration. And you can see that it's making a brand new client right here using the connection strings app config. And then it's identifying a LaunchDarkly user. And if you don't have an email address passed into the index, what this does is it just passes a default email address. That way they can identify users, and here's the evaluation, like client, which is the LaunchDarkly client. I'm trying to get a bool, so it could be there are some other variations that are here, like I need a float or an enum or a string or JSON. So there's some variations, but pretty much evaluate the beta flag for this user, and a default value is false. So if the system's offline, it can't hit LaunchDarkly, here's a default value, you can provide it. I'm just putting it on the view bag because it does not integrate as easily into that feature management stuff we talked about before. So let's go take a look at how I had to do the markup side. If looking at the beta controller, still, you can turn it on or off here in your controller, but it's the markup I think is a little less fun. So I was just using the view bag. I'm defaulting it to false, and I'm saying, hey, doing some razor code. If this view bag is defined and it's true, show this markup. Let's see what this looks like running. I know from experience from the last few minutes that this probably won't launch as quickly as the local one. And I know we've got about 8 minutes left. So I'm gonna do this one and we'll talk a little bit more. And let me start my local one. Sorry, my screen's so big. I've been used to projecting, so I didn't think to reconfigure it to a smaller size. But all right, so we've got that running. And if I come to the local host, well, this one came up, so that's fine. So I've got the Azure hosted one, and I've got my feature flag in LaunchDarkly. Let's go ahead and turn this on. Because this has some functionality built around, hey, maybe I want to schedule turning this on, or I need approvals, or I'm doing a demo in my production environment. They try to really make sure you know that you're turning something on or off. So I've enabled it. I refresh, and it's already taken effect. And the local one ever spin up, I don't know. Oh, 5,000, that's why. But that helps if I do 5,000. If I go back here and we turn this off, it's gone, and it's gone. So this is where we haven't redeployed code, but we've turned things on and off rather easily. I do want to point out for those interested, this code is out there on the feature flags area. I've also got, so in this case, I have some workflows that are deploying these up into Azure. If you're interested in, hey, I pointed at that config, I'm building it out, and I'm deploying it out to Azure, or you can play with it locally. And I did mention that feature flag story. I want to make sure I share that. It was, yeah, here we go. When feature flags go wrong. Is that the one? No, that is not the one. But I will find that and I'll post that up to the talk site with the slides. But we've got about 4 minutes left. Are there any questions, or is there anything anyone would like to talk about with maybe some use cases or around the models or database side or anything like that? And feel free to come off mute and ask it, or ask it in the chat. All right, well, I will ask a question then. Okay, we got in the chat. Any suggestion for cleaning feature flags as we make features permanent? That is a good question. So ideally, when you first start using feature flags, you start diving into them. This is where we're starting to have a lot of DevOps processes. We're having CI/CD. We're starting to deploy things more regularly, and you start getting to a state where there are teams that are committing code that is not yet complete, but you're still wanting to get checked in and maybe have it turned off. You know, a lot of times those flags are not going to be long-term flags as you make the features permanent. A lot of times those are temporary, and you know, as the feature gets complete and released to production, this is where you want to start cleaning those up and removing them. GitHub actually has an amazing way of dealing with feature flags. They recently blogged about it. Yep, there we go, back in April. So GitHub is written in Ruby, and one of the things they did, and I think this is a great article to read. They have a lot of talk about flags, but they actually wrote there's like a Ruby language processor or something that uses regular expressions and get grep. So Ruby cop AST, an abstract syntax tree, but it finds references to feature flags. So they always use the exact same pattern for feature flags. And then when they're ready to remove it, this automatically knows the code changes to undo that format that they used. Launch Darkly, I think that one has a great feature of when you're using a feature flag, where in my code is it being used? I usually wait like a sprint or a little bit of time, or like as soon as the feature is accepted and it's fully merged in and we've decided this feature is complete, we're going to turn it on and leave it on. That is a time where you go in and you clean up the feature flag. You take it out, you remove the old code. There's no greater joy in life than deleting old obsolete code. It's awesome. But that's a lot of what we do. Keep track of when they're in use, keep track of when they're integrated and accepted and you're ready to go live, and then add work to remove that, or have some tooling or automation to help remove and clean that up. So any other questions? That was a good one. Thank you.